Welcome back, everybody, to TIMBP Live. I'm Perry. Thank you guys so much for being here again for yet another week. Oops. Hope you guys have been well. I know it's been kind of a long week for a lot of us, but I can feel things kind of slowing down just a hair. And usually by the time we get here, things have slowed down quite a bit too. So it's a good feeling. If you are coming in right now, hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel. If you're watching on the replay, thank you so much for being here. But also, throughout the stream, if you feel so inclined and you'd like to support the show, you can hit up the Stream Elements link below. I'll throw my overlay up here too. It's going to be in a slightly smaller screen than what you're used to seeing, but you can support the show through Snuffy Chats in support of course, Mr. Snuffleupagus back here. You know the man. You can see your message on screen too, on my little screen. Anyway, enough chitter chatter, I say, says I. It's time to get down to the nitty gritty of it. Please welcome new friend of the show, a guy that I just learned how to pronounce his last name correctly too about 2 minutes ago. But from Old Lion Spirits, ladies and gentlemen, it is Mark McLaughlin.
Hey Perry, how are you?
Doing great, Mark. How are you, man?
Good. Happy to be here.
Good. Thanks so much for hanging out with us tonight. We were contacted by my good friend Tracy from Estes PR about having you on, talking about the distillery, talking about what it is that you guys do. And you have quite a unique story, too, that I think people have kind of heard before, but I want to give you the opportunity to let folks know to the origins of Old Line.
Sure. And thanks again, Perry, for having me here. And as a word of advice, I can tug along sometimes. So just give me the wrap it up signal, or
hey man, that's what we're here for.
And I'll go faster, funnier. But thanks for having me here. No, the origin story is we didn't realize, I think, how unique and interesting it might. Well, we knew how unique it was. We didn't realize how interesting it would be to people until we actually started telling people, and it really has been something that it captures a lot of interest. Arch Watkins, my business partner, and I, co-founder, and I, our background is naval aviation. So we were naval flight officers for, I was about 12 years, 10 active, 2 reserves. And then I ended up, leaving the reserves for career reasons. And then Arch was 10 active, 11 active, 9 reserve, and he retired. And we were naval flight officers, which is think of like Goose and Top Gun. We were the guy running the weapon system, the navigator, the guy without the 20/20 vision that, still wants to fly. And a plane called a Prowler. It's an old beast of an airplane, EA-6B Prowler, and then onto a Growler, which is like a version of the Super Hornet. And at any rate, did that. That's how we met and became friends. And after the service, while we were both in the reserves together, I became an investment banker, and Arch was an engineer. Arch, he liked it enough. I don't think it was lighting his world on fire, but I think it was interesting work, good pay. But he was kind of looking around for something a little different, maybe, or had his eye open. Investment banking was not a good fit for me. I mean, I learned a ton, met great people, but it just was not where I was. It's just not a good fit. And I did 2 years of that, and then said, you know what, I can't do this anymore. And I had this nagging desire to not only have my own business, but in the whiskey industry. Like all of us here, I love whiskey. And it was 2014, so for lack of a better term, I don't like the term craft for any, I just don't like the word. But it is what it is. The craft spirits movement was really starting to take off. I wasn't getting any younger. I had enough money from banking, which wasn't a ton, but enough of a bonus that I could say I can live on this for a few months and try to figure something out. So I quit the job and said, you know what, I've reinvented myself from civilian to naval aviator to banker. Well, hopefully I can reinvent myself into distillery owner. And the first thing I did was fly out to Seattle for a wedding, actually. And there just so happened to be the American Distilling Institute was having their annual conference that same week. For those
wow.
of you not familiar, yeah, it was serendipity. Literally, I was Googling like Seattle distillery because I was sitting there. I'm like, hey, I'm going to this wedding. I want to start a distillery. They got a ton of breweries out there. They probably have distilleries. So I'll just see if I can pop in and say hi to somebody. And the first thing that came up on my search was this conference. And all right, well, that looks like a sign. Let's go to that. And then ended up going to that conference while I was out there. And on the second day, I was just checking my email on my phone and feeling overwhelmed. Like, holy smokes, I had healthcare a few days ago. I had a job. I had income. I have no idea what I'm doing. What have I done? Kind of moment. And a gentleman plopped down on the couch next to me and starts chatting me up. He's in his 70s. His name's Bob Stilnovich, still a good friend. And Bob just says, hey, who are you? Where are you from? What are you doing here? And I said, my name's Mark. I'm from Baltimore, and I'm trying to start a distillery. Former Navy guy. Don't really know what the hell I'm doing. And he's an Army vet, Vietnam. And after about 5 minutes of chatting, he said, all right, man, well, you want to buy my business? I'm like, whoa. So, having been mostly an M&A banker, mergers and acquisitions, I'm thinking process, I'm thinking lawyers and banks and all this stuff. I don't know how small this thing really is. So I started asking him, like, okay, Bob, who's your attorney? Where are you on the process? How many offers do you have? Like, what do I need to do to catch up to look at this? And he's like, whoa. You're the first guy I've told. So Bob, God love him, came down. His distillery was 90 minutes north of Seattle, very coincidentally, very close to where I used to be stationed for years. He came down to ADI trying to find a lost puppy like me because he was trying to sell his business. And he was 71 or 2 at the time. His business partner / neighbor / friend, Jim Caudill, was terminally ill. So it went from being this really fun, 2 knuckleheads that are buddies making whiskey in a barn, essentially, and making really nice whiskey. It went from that very quickly to, well, Jim, couldn't be around the fumes from the still, couldn't be around the grain dust. And God knows what else he was dealing with, right? So that's when they decided, you know what, it was fun while it lasted, but let's try to pass it on. But they didn't want to just shut it down, sell the barrels and whatever. They wanted to pass it on, pass the torch. So it was a match made in heaven. They were vets, we're vets. They were Vietnam, we're Iraq, Afghanistan, and Anyway, and going out there, kicked the tires, went and made whiskey with him for a couple of days, along with a good friend who recently passed away, Richard Wolf, who ended up being one of our board members. Richard went out there with us and kind of gave it the, hey, this is small but legit. And then eventually, we scratched together enough money from friends and family to get the number that Bob wanted for the business. Apprenticed, bought it, and brought it back to Baltimore. So that's the longer version. Yeah.
Sure. So I don't know if I've ever said this on any of our podcast things that we do, but the Navy is actually fairly near and dear to my heart. My grandfather was a naval officer, I think right after World War II.
Okay.
Never saw combat or anything, but it's still something that at the very least is lodged in the back of my mind. It's the guy that I was named after too. So I gotta hold on to a little bit of that that fervor. I suppose.
It's you. I love that because we hear that a lot. People to the exact very similar to what you said. Like, hey, they'll almost be like a little sheepish. Well, my grandfather was in the Navy. I'm like, that's great. Like, you have I idolize my grandfather. So like, he was a fireman. I'm not, but I tell everybody he was a fireman.
Right.
And
right. Yeah.
That connection is huge for military and things like that. And so I appreciate you saying that. It's the best thing I ever did. I would do it 10 times out of 10. Getting out was a really hard choice.
Sure.
That's a good discussion. It was really, I rolled the dice on like, hey, I applied to 3 grad schools that all should laugh at me. One of them didn't, and they let me in. And I'm like, well, all right, maybe I should try this opportunity. So I went to get my MBA. But it was a hard choice to get out.
What was nagging at you then that made you want to change those paths?
The biggest thing is, as much as I love the Navy, one of the things I didn't like about it, especially in the officer career path, is that, much more so in the officer career path. In the enlisted path, there's, in my opinion, if things, maybe a tour doesn't go the way you want or something happens, you can kind of recover, right? Okay, I'll do another hardship tour and I'll work my tail off and I'll kind of make up for it. In the officer path, you're kind of up or out. And I was very fortunate to have been on the right track. but you never know when that's going to change for reasons that you can't control. So, for example,
Right.
let's say you're in a squadron with like 5 other guys that you're technically competing against for rankings, and they're amazing at their job. You all are. Well, there's got to be number 1, and there's got to be number 5, and so somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. And you're in another squadron that has 5 knuckleheads. There's still a number 1 and a number 5. So sometimes I didn't want to put my heart and soul into something for 15, 20 years more, or 15, 20 years total or more. And then all of a sudden, like, I'm completely capable of screwing up my own career. I didn't want it to be done outside of my control. That was a big. I saw a lot of good guys get, and then the Navy got it right more often than they got it wrong, which I think is great. But it's a big machine, and I saw several good guys kind of get screwed, and all of a sudden they're like 42. The career didn't go the way they wanted it to. And they're like, well, what do I do now? So I just wanted to kind of make my own future. And
it's funny to me, not funny, haha, necessarily, but just interesting in the thinking that you went from a position that, you said you didn't have a whole lot of control over. Yes, you were a financial manager, but you still, kind of came back around to that same mentality of, let's take a chance on something. Let's do something that, may not wind up being fruitful. And 2017 was a great year, though, for a distillery to open. I mean, it was just as things were really blowing up for American whiskey, and really I feel like that was the proper time for you all to be on the fast track too for that. But at the same time, I mean, surely you had some of those reservations of like, well, I don't have as much control over this as I kind of would have wanted to, right? What is that kind of like journey looked like for you since the distillery was first opened?
So, and correct me if I'm not answering the question that you're asking, but part of it one of the things that allows me to sleep at night in a it's a life stressful, whether you own a distillery or you do whatever. I mean, no one's got it. It's everything's stressful, right? So my version of stress happens to be, a small business owner, and it's gotten a lot better. But even in the early years when it was, hey, are we going to make it the next quarter because we've committed to making a lot of whiskey, and it's got to age, and that money's got to be in the barrel, and are we going to be able to make payroll and this, that, and the other? Luckily, we're past that point. I mean, where I'm not lying awake at night wondering anymore, which is great. But for the while there, what kept me going was the fact that, by and large, do we make the right choice all the time? Absolutely not. Right? We make mistakes every day, just like everybody else does. But what Arch and I can always look at, almost always say, if given the same set of circumstances, we'd probably make the same choice, which is basically saying, hey, we did the best we could with the information at hand, and we made a choice, and whether it was right or wrong, it was, right? So as far as like not having control, that's kind of where the control I have is to try my best to make sound decisions and prudent choices. Right. And at that point, like, if it goes downhill from there for some reason, then, I won't be happy, but I can live with myself with that. I guess that's kind of, I don't know if that answers your question at all. That's kind of how I manage that feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause the thing that I've been talking about, at least, in the 3 weeks that we've gotten into the new year, is that I really only had like one resolution, and that was to, for better or worse, say yes to being more creative and creative opportunities, right? And not necessarily that, everything that I am creative with happens within the confines of 2023, but at least just like making that venture happen, and just finding a way to sit down and write, or if somebody wants to collaborate on something, just going, yes, absolutely, let's do it. I can't lose with this one. I can only gain any kind of experience from saying yes to projects like that. And so I imagine too that there's as much like extrinsic success, there's plenty of intrinsic success that you're feeling too, through the success of the distillery.
100% agree. And even before, I mean, I don't know what defines success. I mean, I know obviously we have goals, right? But right now, yeah, are we printing cash? No, we're a small business, but we're a viable going concern making we think is phenomenal whiskey, and we're growing fast. So all these things are great. But even before, like, when we were pre-revenue, there was that satisfaction of that kind of like man in the arena kind of thing. Like, okay, I'm doing it. Whether and if I fall flat in my face, then at least I'll look back and be like, I tried, right? And very, very happy to say that we've had a lot of success. So, so far so good. It's working out. But even before the business was, where it is now, I think there was just still a lot of like satisfaction, and I'm not going to look back in 20 years and say what if, whether for better or worse, I'll know the result because I'll live it. So.
You made it happen for yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So let's talk about the whiskey.
Yeah.
In and of itself. What up? Matt Porter's in the chat. Hello, Matt. ADHD whiskey. Of course, everybody's.
Hey, Matt.
You guys got to go check him out if you haven't already. But of course, everybody who's here has. There's no way. My dad stopped in for a bit. Popped in, Papa Ritter. Our Aussies. Hello, Chris. Hope you're well. But Dustin brought up the very important point of Yas, American Single Malt. So I think my first question is why, when we're considering American Single Malt? Why in a boom of bourbon and rye American whiskeys did you all opt for this, in some ways, kind of tertiary whiskey that doesn't have as much publicity and doesn't have as much popularity within the United States?
We're gluttons for punishment over here. No, it's I tell you, I wish I could tell you that we were reading the tea leaves and we just saw something that very few other people did and made a jump for it. Like what I think probably Westland could say, right? Those guys were, and the guys down at St. George, all the Balcones, the guys who've been doing this longer than we have, that frankly probably saw that. They saw, hey, this is going to be inevitable. We should get in on this.
Right.
For us, it was accidental. It was because Bob and Jim were making single malt, and the reason they were making single malt, as wonderful and smart as they are, they weren't looking to grow this thing big. They were looking to make fun whiskey that they liked, and they just started messing around with grains and decided that an all malt grain bill aged in virgin oak was what they wanted to drink. So that's what they made. So they just made what they wanted and made it really well. We met them, had this opportunity to come in and learn how to make whiskey with Bob. And, at first, actually, I was very disappointed when Bob told me that he didn't make any bourbon or any rye, because we set out with that in mind, Arch and I, for all the reasons that you just kind of alluded to. And I will say, I can say almost unequivocally that if we had been making bourbon and rye these past, 6-7 years, it would be easier to sell. Everybody knows what a bourbon is. Everybody knows most people know what a rye is. And I'll come back to that point in a minute. But so this really fell into our lap. And at first I was disappointed, like I said. And then Bob, after I met him at the conference, he said, listen, man, I'll ship you some bottles. Ship me, 6 bottles, whatever. And I remember sitting on my back porch and popping a bottle open and then taking a sip. And what I wanted it to be was bad, because this whole this whole paradigm, I wanted to make bourbon and rye. This wasn't bourbon and rye. I wanted to start my own thing from scratch. This was kind of taking over somebody else's baby and then making it my own. All these things didn't fit the paradigm I had in my head. And I took a sip and I loved it. And I'm like, oh, come on, And my wife came out and she's like, stop feeling bad for yourself. It's good whiskey. That's good. No, start a company. So, so with that, they gave it to us. And, so we eventually, it didn't take us very long to see the opportunity that was there with it. But yeah, I wish I could say, I was ahead of the game, but I was a lucky man.
Yeah. So, sometimes those are just the best success stories too. You wind up falling backwards into something like that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your current line of products too. What do you all have on the market? What is kind of your baseline for people who are looking to get into not just old line,
sure.
but American single malts in general?
So first, to open with that, for American single malts in general, it's an awesome, I'm biased, right? I'm in it. It's an awesome category. And I think that one of the things that we have going for us in malt is that because we are not defined, well, right now we're very loosely defined. We're technically not even a single malt. We're American malt whiskey is what our category is according to the government, and very soon to be officially sanctioned as American Single Malt Whiskey. So right now, as we're all adhering, at least all of us, to my knowledge, are all adhering to the definition that we proposed to the government, which we think is going to get passed. Which is, there's a couple of layers of definition, but it's 100% malted barley. It can be made with the column or pot still. It can be aged in barrels of pretty much any size. I think 700 liters the biggest, but they can go small barrel, virgin oak or used oak. So the point I'm getting at is that, compared to a bourbon or a American rye or a single malt scotch, those are defined a little bit more rigidly. And that makes sense. These are these venerable categories, venerable, whatever the word is, these established categories that I understand they want to protect it. They don't want some knucklehead to come in and call something bourbon that doesn't really fit the bill and making the category look bad. So that makes sense for all those categories. They got to protect what they've built over hundreds of years. Well, we're brand new. So for us, it's more important, I think, to differentiate and to allow virgin oak and used oak, to allow column pot still distillation. All those things gives us in this category, I think, a little more wiggle room. And then the fact that our primary ingredient by nature, malted barley, the malting process also gives us a ton of flexibility. You can have malts that taste like chocolate and malts that taste like, stone fruit, when you distill them. So all these, so we just have a really, really big canvas, which I think is really exciting. So I think some people view it as, oh, you're just trying to recreate Scotch in America. And I firmly believe, I don't really think any of us are doing that. We're all have tremendous respect for the Scotch world and the bourbon world and the rye world. We are trying to truly make our own way, which is why it's special. So that's kind of, for me, the why. I think consumers really should dip their toe into a lot of the brands. I mean, I mentioned a couple before, but there's a whole host of people making really, really great American single malts. We're doing it in a way that is our way, but isn't the way everybody's. So we're embracing more of the new world style. So we age everything, with the exception of like barrel finishing or something, in virgin American oak, almost entirely number 4 char, some number 3. So we're embracing that bourbon style aging. And most of what we do is non-peated. And in our we also, in the way we distill it, we don't go quite as deep into the tails as the tails region. That's all kind of subjective what tails is, but generally speaking, you'll see malts go deeper into that range for some of that real rich, buttery, oily mouthfeel. We do our cuts a little differently, where we want it to be a little bit cleaner and crisper, the way American style whiskeys are. So all that to say is that that's what we're doing. And then you look at Westland or Westward or Balcones and all these guys are in Virginia Distilling Company. They're doing wonderful things with their own way. So there's just a really a lot to discover. So and anyway, I think I got off on a tap dance there, but for ours,
it was beautiful. Thank you for showcasing your talent. Yeah.
So we got see my camera. Oh boy, it's like it's moving backwards.
Here, let's also get you all focused up too.
Is that? Oh, there we go. Okay.
There we go.
So we got. It's kind of hard to see in the glare here. That's the Old Line American Single Malt Whiskey. This is 86 proof, and then that's our flagship, and then we have our barrel strength, cask strength. Now these are actually very soon to change slightly, but these are. I'll come back to why in a minute. But these are our flagship line, and that's really what is our bread and butter. Now we do a lot of barrel finishes and things like that. Oloroso Sherry being our longest running that we release it's gonna be every February.
Very nice.
Yep, that's great. That's getting a lot of attention. We actually won Best Single Malt Whiskey in America with that on the Ascot Awards this year.
Oh, congratulations!
Excuse me, in 2022, last year. Thank you. Yeah. We went down to head-to-head and ended up pulling on a win. So and then so Madeira, Ruby Port, Tawny Port, all these things. And right now we're in the phase of figuring out what is going to be kind of our winners long term. So we're going to narrow that range down. What we don't want to do is be all over the map. So we release a lot of them locally, either at the distillery or maybe in Maryland in our home market, figure out what really works. And then those are the ones that are going to become mainstays in the market. So Oloroso Sherry, definitely a mainstay. Madeira, definitely a mainstay. So you're going to start to see those out in the market in places like New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Colorado, the other markets that we're in. Everything is anchored by that oak forward character by design, right? We want that, that old line character to kind of come through. And then one last thing before I'll put a muzzle on here. one thing we found is as much as we love this category and we love it and we're sticking with it and we're laser focused on American single malt. We do very few other things. Really right now it's the category, like, the way I describe it is that if 1,000 people walk into a busy liquor store on a Saturday afternoon, I'm extremely lucky probably if what drove that person to the store was that they needed more American single malt, right? They're there to buy bourbon or rye or beer or Truly or, gin or whatever the hell it is they need. So we're not at the point as a category yet where that's what's driving people to point of sale typically. And that's a challenging thing for a business, right? You have to figure out how you can join in on that. We're not trying to bump somebody else out of the cart. We just want to join in the cart, right? Let us jump in with you. So, and that's a challenge for us. So American Single Malt, another challenge we have is that I was in an account yesterday morning who did a sherry barrel pick, a place called Midway Liquors here in Maryland, great store. And they said that they sold a ton in the first few months and then there's a long tail. And the guy said that everybody who tasted it loved it and bought a bottle. Because he would say, he would find whiskey drinkers he knew would, hey, try this. But he said so many people wouldn't even try it because they don't like single malt. He's like, no, this drink's totally different from anything you've ever tried in the single malt world. And he's like, it's amazing how many people wouldn't even want to try it. So that's where we are as a category, I think, is trying to convince these long-standing bourbon and rye drinkers that maybe you don't like certain types of malt, but there's a malt out there for you, and this might be the one.
Right. I think too that it may not be immediately obvious to a lot of people, but I do think for those who have had experience with single malts, not necessarily American, but Irish, Scotch, whatever however you want to categorize it, there is a different kind of level of acceptance that whiskey drinkers have for that flavor profile. And so, I mean, if I can imagine too that there are plenty of these people who maybe don't know what American single malt is or don't know what that flavor profile looks like. And, I think you all have a very distinct advantage as well by being able to use virgin barrels.
Agreed.
To create your products. But I want to jump back just a little bit and talk about the legal categorization, the legal definition for American single malt whiskeys. You all have had a hand in that too, in getting that legislation passed through. Talk about that journey. I'm curious, how did that really start for you all, and what kind of lit the fire underneath you all initially to make that happen?
It's a great question. I think the credit primarily goes to some of the distilleries that were a couple years ahead of us that really got that process, at least got us all talking, right? So we're part of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, which is, I'd have to look and see how many members. Maybe it's 100, maybe it's 70, maybe it's 150. I don't know how many it is now, but really people who have a vested interest in producing, whether they do it entirely, or primarily like we do, or maybe they just make a little bit, but they have a vested interest in it. But the Westland Balcones, I think a great distillery down in New Mexico called Santa Fe Spirits, Cole Keegan. He great guy, great whiskey. Those guys, there was maybe I think Few Spirits was on there too. They got this, they were the founding members of saying, hey, there's no definition, why don't we make one? And to be very honest, when I first became aware of this, I was against it. And my thought was, hey, why invite more scrutiny? Like if we have a loose definition now, why invite the government to look at it and make it even, more restrictive and hurt us, or something that possibly hurt us? And Arch, my business partner, he made a really good point, which I agreed with, was that they're going to do it eventually. Like this is growing. It's going to be, TTB is going to look at this someday, whether we want it or not, and say, what's all going on here? And they're going to place, definitions on it. So why don't we do it, on the front foot and really put out there what we think it should be and give them something reasonable and say, this is what we all agree to. So, I was probably a bit of a sea anchor on that at first, because I didn't think we should, but I've come around and I think it's exactly the right move. So Yeah, and that's really, I mean, we just wanted to get ahead of the government. I mean, hey, the government's got to regulate. We get it. I'm not bad mouthing the TTB, but
be careful.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Might get in a little bit of trouble right now.
But it's hey, that's we just thought, hey, let's just work with them, not against them, and that's been great. Arch, of the two of us, Arch actually takes more of a lead on that in our business. He's actually going out to Portland, Oregon, for the American Craft Spirits Association conference in February. And the main reason we're going there is because there's going to be a meeting of the commission. So we want to have our voice represented.
Right.
And so it's been a good thing.
So Dustin brings up another good point. Also want to say, hey Marty, thanks for stopping in. Dustin says, big fan of the product, but need distribution in the Midwest. Dustin's in Indiana and loves what you guys do, but we do have we can't find it on our shelves out here, and we can't even get it shipped to Kentucky, Indiana, this area yet either.
Yeah, it's that's a great point. I'd say that where we are now, we want to be actually Indiana is on a short list of states that are kind of next on our list. We're not going to be there this year, but that is Indiana, Illinois, South Carolina, and you made this a whole discussion on why those markets, because those markets may not jump to mind as why not California, why not Florida? Well, there's reasons behind these things, right? As you'd imagine. But at any rate, where was I going with that? Oh, so what we found, because we're in this new category, we can't enter a market necessarily the same way as a bourbon could,
Right.
And not saying entering a market with bourbon is easy, it's not. But just I think that if we were making bourbon or rye and that was a little more understood, we'll go to Indiana, we'll go to Kentucky, blah blah blah. We'll get the distributor, we'll get on the shelves, we'll do promo. Okay, pretty soon we'll be breathing, right? We'll be we'll have enough pull through to kind of make it work. With American Single Malt, we found it takes so much more work. Once we get that customer, we have an extremely loyal customer base. But American Single Malt, we found it's much better for us to go very deep, find a pretty small number of target accounts, and really love those accounts, get to know them, and then get that pull through, and then expand it. So that requires a lot of hand holding and a lot of effort from me and Arch, and soon to be some of our brand ambassadors that we will be hiring here soon. To really go out there and be in market a lot. So we don't want to go to, for example, Indiana, get it on the shelf, and without the ability to fully support it, and then it collects dusts, and now no one's happy, right? Because the store owner's got product that's not moving.
Right.
I'm lying awake at night again because product's not moving in Indiana. So I think that we're pretty close in the next year or two where the category and the brand get big enough where I think we can start to do more markets and really get it out there. But yeah, I hear you. I would love to be in more markets, but until we just want to make sure that we don't hit a market too soon and flub it, and then that's not good for anybody.
Yeah, the proof positive model, I think, in this case, definitely is the right approach for sure. Have you seen a good measure of people who have, you said you have a very dedicated, very loyal supporter base. Have you seen a lot of bourbon or rye drinkers not only be surprised by American Single Malt, but also kind of been converted to it as well?
I can only think of one person that I would say, well, actually, no, it's a true convert. I'm an ASM guy, my buddy Jeff, he's a big Scotch guy. He's not a big bourbon guy. He likes malt drinks more than corn based. But he is really on the bandwagon of single malt. It's awesome. But as far as really what we're seeing more of, which is actually what we want, is, we understand that the whiskey drinker that we're targeting, would be a person who, probably sips whiskey a couple times a week, has a rotation of maybe 5 or 8 kind of favorites. And then whether they have a big collection or not outside of that, but there's a rotation, kind of gone are the days where, I'm a McLaughlin man. That's all I drink. That's kind of more old school. Most of us, me included, like to rotate around. And We want to get on that merry-go-round. So we're not trying to necessarily make a bourbon drinker or a rye drinker into solely an American single malt drinker. We're just trying to say, hey, there's room on there for something different. And I describe what we provide as like, I've never been a DJ before, but I've like, the booths with all the things go up and down and all that. If you consider those flavors, like the baseline flavor set we're delivering at Old Line, I think, is largely, it'll overlap with bourbon 90%. It's just the knobs and the dials are at different levels, right? So we're bringing you what you already love, just in a very, very different way. So yeah, that's. But bourbon and rye drinkers are our earliest adopter. We actually get it easier to acquire them as a fan and a customer, simply because, well, one, our flavor profile trends a little more new world than old world. But more importantly, I think, is that I think bourbon drinkers in general are a little more promiscuous than the average Scotch drinker. Very brand promiscuous.
Sure, yeah. I knew what you meant. I appreciate the clarification, but I definitely picked up what you were putting down there. So
that's, and it's a very broad brush, because I know so many Scotch drinkers who'd love to try new things, but in general, on average, they're a little more willing to be like, okay, I'll try a new thing. So that's, we price our product to be, $40 for our 86 proof on the shelf, $39.99, and $54.99 for our barrel strength. And that we're trying to price it where that kind of, mid to high range bourbons are, as opposed to we're up above where the malts are in the 60s, 70s, 80s, because we want to price it where our target consumer typically shops.
Right. I want to say hey to a couple people who are popping into the chat. Jake Miller, had my first pour of whiskey in a year yesterday, and I am shockingly feeling a slight hangover. Jake, do you mean like your first pour this year, or literally your first pour since a year ago? I'm curious what the distinction is there. I just, point of clarity for me. Cheech is here. Good to see you, Cheech. Hope you've been well, buddy. And Jeffrey Whack, the Whack Attack, says, hello again, whiskey friends. Hello to you, Jeff. Hope you are well. Congratulations on hitting your 500 subscribers on YouTube as well. Also, Cheech gave a little confused face for the promiscuity comment there.
I don't mean you, Cheech. Sorry. By the way, incidentally, Jake Miller, I used to fly with a guy named Jake Miller, call sign was Mouth. So I saw that. I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's Mouth, messing around with me. And then I flew with the guy named called Cheech. And then I flew with the guy, Jeffrey Whack. We call him Whacker. So like, it's like my whole pass is
coming. That was so weird.
That's weird.
3 guys all at the same time. One of my best friends growing up was named Jake Miller. I don't think this is the same. If it's the same one, I'd be very surprised, but I don't think this is the same one. He said first pour in 12 months, had 3 pours of Rare Breed. Dang. That dry 2022 cleanse. Yes. That's impressive. You had, Mark also brought up a little bit ago that there were going to be, Cheech says, good to see you, Mark. He misses the old days, man.
Okay.
But so you brought up that there were going to be some changes to your products. Before we get to that, I want to ask you too, because this was a company that you were able to kind of fold yourself into, that you and Arch were able to, kind of just be a part of. What, if anything, did you all do with that product that you were kind of handed, that process that you were handed, if anything at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, I'm surprised I didn't delve into that earlier, which, so I'm glad you brought it up. A couple things. One, well, first of all, what we're making today, so we make single malt whiskey. We import some rum. We make a tiny bit of vodka, mostly for our own bar. Those are kind of, I don't want to dismiss them, but they're just like little tiny silos in our business, and we're mostly malt. And our baseline malt is the exact same grain bill, almost identical yeast. We made a slight change to the yeast, but not a very meaningful one. And still aging in new oak, although they were doing it in smaller barrels. We're using bigger barrels. So but fundamentally the baseline ingredients are pretty much the same. A couple of things we do differently is Bob and Jim were producing on, believe it or not, a 60-gallon pot, which was their big still. They had a 30-gallon pot before that.
Oh, snap.
And we still have it here as a showpiece. We could. It's rigged for electric. We could plug it in any time. But I mean, it makes no sense to. It's small. But at any rate, that's what they were making it on. And they were actually single distilling, believe it or not. Bob, wow. And it actually worked out. Like for them, we double. But Bob would take, so if, I wish I could show you a picture, but if you, our still, our old still, it's made by, I think it was Copper Moonshine. I forget who made it, but it looks almost like a lava lamp, the still head, instead of being rounded or like a witch's hat or whatever, it's kind of goes like this and back in. And Bob would shove about 100 feet of copper mesh up there. And that acted as a reflux agent. And he found that he got a really good result. Now it was very buttery, oily, tailsy, not in a bad way. I mean, it was phenomenal whiskey, sure. But definitely very, very, more tails heavy, if you'd say that. When we took over the business, we went immediately to double distilling, just what we wanted to do. We just, the style of whiskey we wanted to produce would be a little bit crisper, a little cleaner. And, but really the couple other changes we made were the result of another partnership that I didn't mention yet, which is, when we bought the business and literally put the whole thing, except for the barrels, the whole thing fit into a 26-foot U-Haul. I mean, that's how small this place was. Like all the fermenters were 53-gallon or 55-gallon blue plastic, like meth lab looking containers, which all looks totally cool when you're in Bob's barn, which has all this charm. But when you put it into a warehouse in Baltimore, it looks like a meth lab. Like it's just, so we got rid of those pretty quick. Well, we still have them somewhere, I'm sure, but
you got to hold on to them for posterity.
Absolutely.
For
absolutely.
like one day you got the original style batch or whatever that you put out. And,
yep, break out the old fermenters.
Yeah, you're like, this is exactly what it was like when we first got the company.
Right.
You gotta try it, man.
I think we probably will. But
I would love that. That'd be cool.
Where was I going with that? When we moved the business to Baltimore, it ended up taking about 2 years to get open here, which mostly the result of some issues with finding the right location and negotiating a lease, things that took a lot longer than they should. So we were depleting products that we had bought from Bob and Jim via third-party packaging while we were just doing that while we get started. And then when it became apparent that we weren't going to be able to get open and start producing anywhere near as fast as we were hoping, we had to look for other options. How do we start making our whiskey with somebody else? And that's when we met Middle West Spirits out in Columbus, Ohio. And Ryan Lang out there, that whole team has been incredible. Not only do they make, I think, phenomenal products, like their Pumpernickel Rye is one of the best whiskeys out there, I think. They also, they're just really good people. And what they allowed us to do, which at the time no one else would allow us to do, was to make our whiskey with them on their still. So they just put in a big 48-inch Vendome column. Their brand, they've designed their business around making their own, but also helping others. So we were able to go out there with our grain bill, our yeast, which is a big one. A lot of distilleries and breweries don't want anybody else's yeast in their place. These guys were confident enough in their procedures and cleanliness and all that to let us do that. And also one of the best things was that they let us go out there and be as hands-on as we wanted to be. So the first couple of runs, Arch and I were out there the whole time. Arch is the ops guy. I'm more the finance sales guy. So, I step back, but then Arch and our distiller would go out. Nowadays, if we do a 3-week run, they'll go out there for a couple of days just to, touch base and, make sure everything's still going the way we expect. But what they allowed us to do is really ramp up our production. And the way I describe it is, Bob, learning to make whiskey from Bob was like your grandmother teaching you to make a cake. Here's step 1, step 2, and here's step last. And if you do things the way I said, you're going to get a good product. So that was hugely valuable to us. But what the guys at Middle West gave us was more the master's level of like, hey, here's why. So one thing we realized, we were choking the yeast. We were putting in too much grain. And then the yeast were almost getting too stressed, I guess is the way it was described to me. And then Bob was throwing in like a yeast booster, like, almost like cocaine for the yeast, and the Middle West guys were like, hey guys, if you just take down your grain a little bit and, change the ratios a little bit, it's a much more efficient process and you'll get as good or better product. And they were right. So, so we've changed things like that, but fundamentally it's the same, same grain, pretty much the same yeast and very similar aging process. It's just that it's in a bigger barrel. So, that's again, long-winded answer to your question.
It's It's all good. But so did you answer the part about what's upcoming too for you guys?
Oh,
You
sorry,
said there
I
are going
did
to be
not.
some
I did
changes
not.
too.
Yes. So thank you. So as we've phased out, so when we started producing, on our own after we took over the business, we laid down some small barrels to get us going in the early years. But we were always laying down larger barrels as the primary. So we do some 10s and 53s and 30s, whatever. So we've long since phased out the really small, the 10s. But right now, the juice in the bottle, the juice that you'll be getting in your mailbox here hopefully in a couple of days, was aged in 30-gallon barrels for 4 to 5 years, and we love it.
Wow.
It's fantastic. And I would be it's long for a 30, but we keep a really close eye on them. We've only ever over oaked whiskey in a 10-gallon, and we just found them and pulled them out of rotation because But yeah,
at that point, you've got like one bottle of it left, whatever's in the 10-gallon.
Actually, that one, some of those came in when we were pulling out. Our 10s were at like 2.5 to 3 years was kind of as far as we let them go. Some of those were coming out at 6 gallons, 6 proof gallons. Yeah, which is not the math that I did when we bought the business. By the way, my financial model was expecting closer to 7.5 to 8. So that was a discussion I had to have with Arch. Like, hey man, our revenue isn't going to be quite what we thought for the whiskey. But so what we're doing, so we're phasing out the 30-gallon barrels. And as far as quality goes, I love them. But these 53s are coming on board that we've had. And the oldest ones we'll be pushing 7 years this year. And we found that for us, a kind of a blend or a marriage of 4, 5, and 6 is a really nice sweet spot. So now that we're phasing out the last of the 30s, we're hitting our forever stride now as far as flavor. So we're calling that internally, we're calling it ASM 2.0. But we're basically taking the white label. We're going to call that the flagship, and that's going to go from 86 proof to 95. Just because, as much as we love it at 86, 95 is better. It shines better. 86 is approachable, but I really think that 90 plus is where most people probably want to be. It's where I want it to be.
Yeah.
And then the cask strength, the blue label, is going to come down to 114, and we're going to do a Navy strength whiskey for 2 reasons. One, we have a pretty robust barrel program, and a lot of our cask strength gets to market as barrel picks anyway, and we can still do small batch, cask strength. And that 114, I always add water to my barrel strength old line anyway. I think it's great at 124, but when I put a ice cube in there and give it a minute, or add a little water, I like it that way. I like it in the mid-teens. So for us, it ties into our background. So those are 2 things we're doing there. So the flavor profile will change. And actually, you mentioned earlier, I think you mentioned people not really knowing what to expect with the American Single Malt flavor profile. We're actually, not for the whiskey nerds, because you guys aren't really going to care as much, but maybe for the more casual consumer, is on the back, there's going to be a flavor wheel, which is basically just communicating like, hey, you're going to taste what you taste, but here's generally speaking what we get.
Sure.
And you see, peat, smoke, 0, vanilla, blah, all this. So we're trying to communicate a little bit to anybody who does pick up the bottle, that gives them a rough idea, because what people think's in the bottle and what's in there are very, very different.
Yeah.
So that's the ASM will be, we do that locally in March in Maryland, DC, and Delaware. And then in other markets, as the final of the old stock is depleted, we're going to bring this in. So we're really excited about that. It's nice. A win-win. I mean, the stuff we have now, I love it. I think we're going to get even better, but we're in a very good spot. We're very happy.
Right. I want to bring up a couple of points. Dustin says, American malt is Scotch on steroids, in my opinion, more and stronger flavors. Brandon in Delaware, I recognize that bar back. I love Old Line. The Armagnac finished is a hitter.
Thanks, Brandon.
Nice. Johnny 5, sipping on an Old Line Caribbean rum finish store pick as I listen along. Cheers.
Johnny 5, you in Jersey or Maryland? I guess I can't get a quick response. Sorry.
No. It's all right. He'll type it out in the comments. And Dustin says, I'm dying now. 95 proof road trip in my future. There you go, man. There you go. What's your kind of dream project? What's the one bottle or one line of products that you would want to put out the most with Old Line?
That's a really good. I get asked questions that are tangential to that, like what's my favorite or things like that. But as far as dream project, I haven't been asked that, at least not in a while. Right now, I don't know if this would go to say this is something we're going to do. Someone say dream project, maybe not. But one thing that using virgin oak and aging in the climate that we live in here in Maryland, which is very much like where you are in Kentucky with the hot summers, cold winters.
Right.
Our aging profile is very similar to that of a bourbon. So you get up to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you're really in a nice sweet spot there. But to go to those double-digit numbers that a lot of malts in Scotland like to hit, you're taking some risk because not every barrel should go 12 years or 15 or 18 years. I mean, many shouldn't, in my opinion, especially with virgin oak, right? So what we are already working towards is how do we get that line of 12 and 15 out there? And first of all, make sure it's good. We're not going to do it just because it's a number. But how do we get to a whiskey that really is special because of, but also like in spite of the age, in spite of, you can over oak, even in a 53-gallon barrel, you can over oak it. So right now where we are in that is like Arch and I think we're pretty good, and our staff here and team, we're pretty good at picking we can pick a pretty good bullpen for barrel picks. Like we'll go through a bunch of samples, say, hey, these are fine, but they don't really, light the world on fire. They're, fine just to go in the regular batch. But okay, this one's a little bit different. This one's a little special. We can pick out barrels that are really good that we think appeal to people. What we're not trained at and what we don't know that we can do yet is to say, here's this barrel at 6 years. This is one that can go a lot longer. And that's where, actually one person that we've worked with in the past and most likely I hope we'll continue to work with is Ashley Barnes from the Spirits Group.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she's great. She and Monica Wolf, awesome people. Yeah. And that's one of the things that she can do. Like she can have that palate and not only experience, but she's done this, for years, but also she's a chemist and she's just got an amazing palate. She can kind of help train us on how to do that. So that's really, I think, where we're looking in the future is how do we create a path where we get these longer age whiskeys where we don't dork it up.
Right. Ashley actually produced one of our favorite bourbons that came out last year, EJ Curley. I don't know if it's Kentucky only.
Okay.
I don't know if you'd heard of or had it before. Didn't know if Ashley brought it along or anything.
No, so we haven't seen her in probably 6 months. I don't know how long it's been out, but about 6 months. Yeah, I'll keep an eye on it. Next time she comes up, I'll ask her to bring me one.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it's good. Yeah, she's very talented.
She's
very
wonderful.
Talented team.
Johnny says picked it up on a work trip to Jersey. The Ben Ash Liquors.
Ben Ash was here yesterday.
Nice.
I actually started today with a hangover because those guys were down last night. Rich couldn't make it. He hurt his back, but Bill and Taylor came down, and it was a good time.
Have you had a pretty easy time as far as like the markets that you're in and the stores that you distribute to? Are those relationships pretty solid?
It's totally depends. Like Ben Ash is a great example. I remember the first time I met them. Awesome people, really great palates. They know their customers. Like they're just good people. Everything you want in a person to work with, they are. And immediately it was like right away. They picked the barrel the first day we met them. And I wasn't there trying to push a barrel on them. I just happened to have samples. Like, yeah, we'll take it. So those guys, it's been like awesome. And then, but it's sorry, is somebody taking my car? Nope. Sorry. We're in a bad neighborhood in Baltimore here, and like my car. And then I see some brake lights, and I'm like, "Is that my car driving away?"
We almost had a first here on TIMBP Live. That could have been.
That would have been hilarious. Yeah.
This could have been submitted as evidence in court.
Yeah.
Here we have Exhibit B when the plaintiff was on a live stream for a bourbon podcast, and
but so it's to your question, it depends on the account. There's we're lucky to have some pretty amazing relationships, and it's just got finding the ones that we're not the right. I don't fault any liquor store owner who isn't jazzed about American Single Malt or Old Line's not their thing. Like that's their business. They know their customer.
Sure.
But when you find that one that works, where it's a mutually beneficial thing, where it's I love it. And that's really, like, to the earlier point, what we're trying to do is just kind of really love those accounts that love us, and everything else will fall in place.
Sure. All right. Because it is a bourbon channel, I got to ask you, If you're reaching for a bourbon, what are you normally grabbing?
So if I'm making a cocktail, I never go wrong with having Evan Williams bottled in bond. I mean, well, first of all, I would happily drink that neat.
Sure.
But that's my go-to. I mean, was it $28 for 175 or whatever the hell it is? It's
something like that.
It's
Crazy.
That's my go-to for making a Manhattan or whatever. If I'm using bourbon, which I'm 50-50 on bourbon and rye on those. But and as far as anything Elijah Craig, I love sipping on. It's really hard to go wrong. The toasted barrel maybe wasn't quite my fave. It was interesting, but yeah, anything Elijah Craig I'll be happy with. But I'm trying to think if there's anything interesting I can share. But you guys probably know way more bourbons than I do. But yeah, I think that's probably a start right there. There's kind of my cocktail go-to, and then I've rarely been disappointed by anything with the Elijah Craig name on it.
I'm sure that it will happen one day. I don't know if it's going to be with, a distiller or somebody who is just a consumer, but I have never asked that question and gotten the response of like, oh, I just drink Pappy all the time. Like I only drink. It just tastes. That's the only thing I care to drink. Not had that yet. Someday, probably.
The only I don't think you'll get it from one of us fellow whiskey nerds or distillers or anything. You probably won't get it. But the brand, if you do hear it from somebody out there in the world, the brand will be Blanton's. That's the one that I've met people who are just like, I'm a Blanton's guy. That's what I do, and that's great. Hey, it's good whiskey, and I just but and I don't fault anybody what they drink. They could drink swill, and that's their money.
Yeah, exactly.
Blanton's isn't swill. Blanton's is very good, but then that's one where I see people just so loyal to that and just be like, that's my thing. That's my thing. I'm like, okay, I'm not here to tell you if it's your thing, it's your thing.
I hadn't been to a store, this particular store, in a while, and I got done with work tonight, ran to go grab a bottle from our liquor barn, and I was like, well, I'll stop in at this store, just see if they have anything, and it's never because I have the intention of purchasing it, but if I see a store with Van Winkle, I am always curious what their absurd prices are. And this was the old Rip 10-year. It wasn't even, Pappy 15, Pappy 23, whatever. $1,060 for the 10-year-old is what this store was selling.
I'll never understand it. I mean, it's bananas. And hey, somebody can have it. Is it good?
Oh, yeah. It'll sell. I mean, somebody's going to buy it for sure. Not me, not this somebody, but somebody else will certainly pay that
even
much.
If I hit the lotto, I mean, I could find a lot better things to do with $1,000 than buy that.
Yeah, 100%.
A place down here, and I don't mean to single out a certain account, but I can't help it because I love these guys. Drug City Pharmacy. It's a place that if you come up here and visit, you should go over there and you should meet those guys. It's one of the many great accounts in Maryland, but they're really close to us, and they have a little soda fountain thing, and they'll do really rare pours. So they're a amazing whiskey account in a very unlikely place. It's it's not a high end area.
Sure.
It's kind of out, not really near. It's kind of just random that it's there, but the guy who owns it, he's a pharmacist, but he loves whiskey, and he's curated this awesome, not only collection, but like he just has great palate for picks, and he's got a loyal. People come from Pennsylvania, DC, to this random little place, and he sell things for, below MSRP typically, or if it's a very rare, he'll be like, hey guys, I got a bottle of whatever. It'll be behind the bar today. It's $15 a pour, one per person, and he wants people to go out there and try it. It's awesome what he does. So I think that it's like the egalitarian, like, hey, this shouldn't just be for the guy who just got his Wall Street bonus. It should be for anybody who likes whiskey.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that model. We've got a couple of bars around Lexington that'll do the same thing, but it's just always kind of nice to
agreed.
See when that happens. We are at our time limit for the evening, unfortunately. Mark, I want to say thank you again so much for being on tonight. At Old Line Spirits, is that where people can follow you all on social media?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So go follow them. Go follow us as well at My Bourbon Pod to get all updates and everything. Head to Patreon, patreon.com/MyBourbonPodcast for as little as $1 a month. You can support the show. And I think that about does it for this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you real soon. Until next time, I'm Perry, and this is TIMBP Live.